Chapter 4. End of the affair. West Ham continued to provoke very strong feelings in me. Sometimes, for instance, when I go back to play there with Chelsea, the bile that spills out against me from the stands at Upton Park has a resonance which incites an anger and resentment which I tried to leave behind when I left the club. And, though there are times when I like to think I could cut West Ham out of my life completely, I realise that will never happen. It's impossible to discard the best part of 20 years of your life. Ridiculous to think I can cast off the club I loved more than any other. Now, however, I mix with very few people who are loyal to West Ham, which is a strange situation, given that I grew up in a house and community which was touched in every way by the club. It's also one I'm more comfortable with. The reason? The treatment I was subjected to by a large section of the West Ham fans. There were certain people who were good to me, people who stuck by me and supported me, even when the fashion was to do the opposite. I have not and will never forget them. They are the real soul of West Ham in my eyes. Fans who appreciate the commitment I showed to the club while I was there and the effort I made to be the very best I could. Unfortunately, they're in the minority. And when I think and speak about West Ham in such a negative way, it makes me very uncomfortable. I don't want to insult those people at the club who've only ever offered me support and affection. They're exempt from any criticism. However, I cannot ignore the feelings I have, nor can I forget what I've suffered. When I return to Upton Park, some people say that they don't agree with the things that were said and done against me. Ordinary people, people in the streets of London, in restaurants, and wherever I go and I'm recognised. I get letters as well from people telling me that they're proud of what I've achieved as a West Ham lad who came through the system. This has happened more during the years at Chelsea under Jose Mourinho, when success has been tangible in the shape of trophies and medals. On the surface, there seems to be a genuine source of affection and admiration among such people, and they also apologise for the way I'm treated when I go back to West Ham now. That's all very well and good, but I don't see anyone standing up and protesting about the cauldron of hate which stirs around them when I run out in the blue of Chelsea. I don't expect people to be on my side. I'm not asking for allies. But I don't understand how anyone can claim to have sympathy for what I've been through and then stay silent while the abuse pours down from every corner of Upton Park. If they're not brave enough to speak their mind when they're in the company of the people they disagree with, then why tell me differently? After all, I'm not the first to be treated in this way at West Ham. Paul Ince was a legend there, a player whom the fans adored and revered because of his commitment and drive. I was a fan of his too. I looked up to Ince when I was a kid and I wanted to be like him, to be as dynamic as he was, to get to the edge of the box and score important goals. He was exactly the kind of player I hoped to become. Ince called himself the Governor, and no one would argue with that title. However, after he left West Ham, he became the arch traitor. I was there with a few youth team colleagues when he came back to play at Upton Park for the first time after his transfer to Manchester United. He got absolutely murdered. They used to have public executions in the East End, but this was a football lynching. Right from kick-off, he was jeered and booed, and it got worse as the game went on. There was a disturbing edge to the chanting, which was born of extreme anger. Ince had his moment, though, and with typical pathos, he scored the equaliser in the last minute, and the place went even wilder. The abuse he got was actually quite frightening. I've tried to understand how people can become so anti-Paul Ince or anti-Frank Lampard. Football is a very passionate game, and fans pride themselves on their love of their team and the depth of their commitment to a club. I'm sure of this because I feel the same way. There's a difference, though, when the attention is wholly transferred to one individual. That's what happens when I return to play at Upton Park. I'm not sure how or why, but somehow the whole occasion is turned into a Frank Lampard hate fest. It's audible when the ground is still filling up and the teams are read out. There's a rumble of dissent at my name, a bit like the old days when I was playing for the home side. It gets worse, and from the first whistle they lose themselves in trying to have a go at me. "Fuck off, Lampard! Fuck off back to Chelsea, Daddy's boy! You Judas!" And of course, the most charming of all, "Fuck off, you fat cunt!" What is supposed to be a football game is transformed into some kind of mass protest about Frank Lampard's return. I'm not being big-headed or paranoid. Anyone who's been to a West Ham versus Chelsea game has heard the abuse and most likely become bored of it, if they're not a season ticket holder. I've heard and read West Ham fans justifying their attitude towards me on account of the fact that they have long memories. I would laugh, but it's not funny. In fact, they have very short memories. If their recollections were as vivid as they claim, then perhaps they would have seen a 5-year-old boy wearing a West Ham top and draped in a scarf that was too big for him, heading to Upton Park to watch a game with his dad and sisters, excited by the prospect of cheering for his team. If they were die-hard fans, they might even have turned up at the odd youth team game and seen the son of a West Ham legend trying his best to emerge from the shadow of his dad, or working his bollocks off in training and in reserve games so that he might one day be good enough to get a game for the club he loved. It seems those who claim to have the recollection of an elephant are no better equipped in that department than a goldfish. People wonder why I still bother about the bad times at West Ham, given how my career has progressed since leaving. The main reason those memories endure is because it lasted such a long time. I was criticised to the hilt when I was there for being Frank Lampard's son and for not being a good enough player. Now that I've come runner-up to Ronaldinho in the vote for World and European Footballer of the Year and won the Premiership with Chelsea, it's become harder for my critics to handle. They said I wasn't good enough for West Ham, but now I am good enough to play for the Premiership champions and England. They've been proven wrong. So what's their response? To admit the mistake? To accept the error and keep their own counsel when it comes to me? No. Oh, no. They go completely the other way. In their cockeyed worldview, they know they've been shown up, but instead of letting it go, they lose all sense of proportion and castigate me even more for having succeeded. They stick their heads in the sand, swear allegiance to West Ham, and decide that they still feel the same way, regardless. They're West Ham fans, and they hate Frank Lampard. How sad. Had I left and failed to improve, had I frittered away what talent I had at Chelsea and never made an impact, then when I return to Upton Park and get the usual, "You wanker, Lampard," and "What a waste of money," it wouldn't be such a crusade against me. It's become a crusade because of what I have become, better and more successful than I was as a West Ham player, and they hate to have been proven wrong. When I was about 18, I went through a spell when I used the internet to look at the fans' sites. There are hundreds of chat rooms and the like devoted to West Ham, which are visited by supporters who would express varying degrees of resentment towards me, from the casual slag-off to the lunatic rant. In these schools of football critique, I was generally referred to as son of, something I was well used to. They called me that to my back when I was running onto the pitch or warming up on the touchline. So at least they were consistent. So was I, consistently hard-working and trying to do my best. If a fan says that I've had a bad game, then that's his opinion, one which he's entitled to if he's been at the match, and something we can agree with or not. As a player, you can be hurt or pissed off by criticism about your performance, but what winds me up is being accused of something of which I'm clearly not guilty. One such accusation was that of being lazy. This was a particular obsession of West Ham fans on the internet when I was, in fact, the hardest worker at the club. I was always in on days off, always stayed behind after training to do extra work, and always tried to improve myself. I'm a lot of things, but lazy is not one of them. Another laughable jibe was that I only ever scored goals in cup games and against crap teams. The phone-ins were great fun for that one. These punters had so many hang-ups about me that I began to wonder if the torrents of abuse I received were actually some amateur attempt at collective therapy. If I was playing well and there were no problems, they would invent one. A favourite was the claim that I never got subbed or dropped because my dad and Harry were in charge. Now, here, I have to hold up my hands. My dad and Harry were in charge. And on the issue of never being a player to get dropped from the starting lineup, I have something to declare. After I joined Chelsea, I played the first 4 games and was suspended for 1, having been sent off. Subsequently, I started 164 Premiership matches to set a new record in English football. It was achieved over 5 seasons and under 2 different managers. So, to all those West Ham fans who complained that I was always on the pitch, I take off my cap. You were right about that, but wrong about the reason why. It had nothing to do with who was picking the team, as proven by events since I left West Ham. There were other incidents when I was at West Ham, when people would regularly approach me after games if I'd gone out for a drink. "Look at you. You played shit today. You have some nerve showing your face after this afternoon." So it went on. One particular evening, I'd gone out with Monks and a few of his mates who were hardcore Hammers fans. The bar we went to was full of burly blokes with very little hair and even less time for me. "Oi, Steve," someone shouted. "There's that Frank Lampard. You've been caning him all afternoon." We'd won 2-1 and played well, but it still wasn't good enough. I was still a kid. I was surrounded by 10 men, and I couldn't wait to get out. I left a few minutes later, feeling utterly deflated. It got to the stage where I didn't have to be among them to feel their anger. It seemed to follow me around. At home, in the street. I was aware of it when I closed my eyes to go to sleep at night, and it was still there when I woke in the morning. It got so bad that I would dread driving to and from the ground on match days. The nerves would begin to kick in the day before and get gradually worse. I couldn't quite grasp what was wrong at first. I thought it was just the normal nervousness about playing, what the result would be and whether I would play well, badly, or even at all. It was only when I left the stadium after a match and was still carrying the same dull ache in the pit of my stomach that I realised something more was going on. Years later, Mum brought the subject up. She told me that she'd been very worried about me. I looked pale and pensive on Saturday mornings and would withdraw into myself as time wore on and the game got nearer. She put it down to match-day nerves at first, but knew quickly that it ran more deeply than that. I was sad. I didn't want to leave the house because of what I was walking into. Mum realised that highlighting it would only make me more conscious and that I would try to pretend it wasn't happening, so she left me alone. I didn't feel this way every week. There were times when I was playing well and knew it, times when I felt more confident and robust. I didn't get much praise for it, though, just less stick. Still, I was grateful for any small relief. It didn't take much for it to change, though. A couple of misplaced passes or getting run off a ball. I would hear it on the chicken run first, the central area of the stand opposite the dugouts where the hardcore fans gathered. Given the volume of noise a crowd of 30,000 people can generate, you could say it started with a murmur. Once those few made their voices heard, it soon gathered momentum. Shouts and jeers followed before it spread around the ground like a cancer. I knew the signs, and it got so bad that I became nervous about receiving the ball. It was ridiculous. I've always been able to take possession from a fullback or centre-half and spread the play. I've been doing it since I was a kid. I do it all day long, still. It's the most natural thing in the world for me. But back then, I became very conscious of what would happen if I messed up. I would see the angle to take the ball from a teammate and think twice. Maybe there was an opponent tracking me tight from behind, and I would be under pressure, and I wouldn't make the run because I was scared it would result in more abuse from the fans. Ian Bishop was one of the most gifted ball players at the club. He was the generation before me, but he suffered a similar kind of criticism when things were not going right for him. It was weird. There were other, more workman-like players at the club who were revered because they made the odd tackle. Michael Carrick came after I left, and he took the same stick. Why? Because he liked to play the game the right way. It's confusing. West Ham pride themselves on a history of teams who played football in the great spirit of the game, yet players who tried to ignite that spirit were slated. As a young player attempting to go about things in the correct manner, there will be times when you give the ball away. You never learn properly without making mistakes. Nobody's perfect. I've chatted to Michael about this since he left West Ham, and there was some similarity in the way we were treated. It was, however, a lot more vitriolic for me. That was partly down to the situation with Dad and Harry, but I think that any club will always have one or two players whom the fans like to get at even when the team's playing well and winning. It's human nature, or rather, the nature of football clubs. Paolo Wanchope got slaughtered at West Ham, and it got worse when the team was struggling. Paolo was very unorthodox. He could be brilliant one day and not so brilliant the next. It happens to everyone. It was just how he was, something that's not unusual for talented players. But when it becomes a real problem is when you see it affect a player's confidence. There are occasions when you look into a teammate's eyes and you can tell there's nothing behind them but fear and loathing. No mental strength, no desire, the only thing occupying their thoughts being apprehension about what might happen next. That isn't good for football. I saw it happen at West Ham. Now, I'm pretty thick-skinned. If I give the ball away, I can get through it and won't shirk going back for the next pass. But back then, there were very dark moments, days, weeks, even the odd month. Every time I got off the bench to warm up, a particular section of the stand would give me stick. I'd go into a sprint to get past them quickly and into the safety of the corner. I'd do the same on the way back. That's how childish it had become. There were times when I didn't even want to play. Times when I was on the bench and already getting stick and found myself hoping that Harry wouldn't put me on so I wouldn't have to face more. Times when I wanted to just walk away and leave it all behind. I didn't have the energy or the will to keep going. I became morose and very depressed about the situation. Dad knew. He watched me play and saw me off the pitch, at training, and around the family. You can hide in a football match. It's actually quite easy to do. I've seen it done. Players give the ball away a couple of times and get uptight about doing it a third time, so they shout to you for a pass, but they're already running in the opposite direction. I was guilty of the same during the worst moments. Dad would have seen it, but he never dug me out. Instead, he encouraged me to keep getting on the ball, stick to the basic football values, face my fear and conquer it. There were occasions when I could have gone under, but Dad was always there to drag me back to the surface. I spent a lot of time considering my options, wondering if I should drop down a level and play lower league. It got to the stage where I thought about jacking in football altogether. I would rather be working 9 to 5 with my mates than taking abuse from 30,000 people every other week. I tried to get out of West Ham a couple of times. I went to see Harry and told him, but he said he wouldn't let me go, that Rio and I had a future at West Ham, that we were the future. Despite my reservations, I could see his point, and, stupidly or otherwise, believed there would be light at the end of the tunnel. I knuckled down and worked harder. I thought and fought my way out of the trough of depression, told myself that I would succeed. The mental strength I developed as a result has been a major factor in my progress since. I realise now that the one benefit that I've accrued from the whole situation is psychological toughness. That's important, because I can still get wound up by the past. One of the things that annoys me is a tendency in West Ham fans to say that I've really come on a lot since I left. I don't deny that I've improved dramatically since I joined Chelsea. That's evident. But I cannot accept that they couldn't see my potential at West Ham. Of course, I've developed since I was aged 18 to 21, but whether through ignorance or otherwise, these fans refused to acknowledge that there were signs of what I could be, even then. If they'd given me a chance, then maybe I would have stayed there longer, or at least departed on amicable terms. I don't enjoy the fact that there's so much animosity between myself and the club I grew up with and loved for so long. They could have given me more of a chance. They might have looked at me all those years ago and seen a young boy who was trying his heart out to do well, a player who was the son of one of the club's most loyal servants and part of one of their most successful sides. They could have thought of that when I made a mistake and encouraged me to do better next time. They could have given me a chance. I see Rio return to Upton Park, and he has no problems at all. I used to wish that was me. I used to think that I would like to be able to go back, get a decent reception, and be done with it, but it's all gone too far now. I won't change my mind about West Ham. I can't. There have been too many incidents which have produced too much bad blood. If I were to run out at Upton Park now and get cheered, I would throw it back in their face. I don't want it now. When I left, the club was in financial difficulty and had to sell players. They got £11 million for me. Not bad when you consider they signed me for nothing. Not bad either for a player who the fans didn't think was worth a place in their team, never mind Chelsea's. It upsets me that I feel no warmth for my time at West Ham. It should have a very special place in my life and my career. I never felt anything but fortunate to be born into a family with such strong ties and staunch loyalty to the club. It was my boyhood ambition to play for my club, and when I finally realised that dream, I wondered if anything else in life would ever make me feel so proud and so happy. Those feelings changed, and I'm genuinely sorry that they had to. It's important to me that people understand just how deeply I feel about what happened. Most players who support a club or have enjoyed a spell with one will always look out for that club's results after they move on. I remember when Joe Cole first came to Chelsea, he would react that way to West Ham. After a match, one of the Chelsea backroom staff would come round the dressing room and recite the day's scores, and Joe would ask about the Hammers. If they'd been beaten, he would turn away in disappointment. My wounds from my West Ham days were still very much open then, and I would greet the news with a wry smile. That's how deeply I felt. I wanted West Ham to lose. Now, I don't have that same enthusiasm. I don't even look for their results. That may sound strange, vindictive even, but I defy anyone to be put through the ordeal that I faced and come out any differently. To those who would revel in the abuse which was directed at me, I will not apologise. Why should I? Am I supposed to suffer this kind of thing for 90 minutes from thousands of people and then just forget about it as soon as the final whistle blows? That's not how life works. What fans can forget too easily is that what happens to players in a game is a big part of our lives. I was badly affected by the experience I had at West Ham. Most of the suffering happened when there was no audience around, after they called me shit, fat, crap, a cunt during a game. Am I supposed to retain a place in my heart for West Ham after this? So too my mum and dad and my family? I don't think so. The truth is that my family have no feelings for West Ham now. What happened was an attack on all of us. It went beyond football and invaded our lives without consideration or mercy. At Chelsea it's different. There were a lot of West Ham fans who mocked the fact that the club had paid a lot of money for me. At the start, it didn't really go well, and the Chelsea fans could have turned against me. They didn't. I was given the opportunity to show what I could do. And when I started to play well and settle in, they immediately recognised it. They sang my name and cheered when I touched the ball. I remember being on the pitch at Stamford Bridge and knocking a long diagonal ball behind the defence to Jesper Grønkjær. He got on the end. though the move ended in a corner. As soon as he picked up the pass, there was a huge roar of appreciation, and when I walked over to take the corner kick, there was a chorus of, "One Frank Lampard." I thought, fucking hell, that's never happened before. This came from fans of a club to which I had no previous allegiance. It made me realise what it is to be given a fair crack of the whip, to be given time to show what you're really capable of. My affinity for the club has grown, and I know that whatever happens in the future, if Chelsea want to sell me or the manager doesn't want me, there will always be a place in my heart for them. I will always look for their result and want them to win. I wouldn't swap the time I've had at Chelsea for anything. They've shown me a respect I never knew at West Ham, nor did my dad. If you talk about West Ham greats, then he's in the first 11. He was there 20 years and played more than 700 games for the club. He broke his leg when he was 18 and fought his way back and played on before working for them and becoming assistant manager. When people talk about Bobby Moore, Geoff Hurst and Billy Bonds, Dad deserves to be mentioned in the same breath. I'm not comparing myself to Dad, but I feel that given the level of loyalty he showed, I might have been treated differently. I wasn't, and now, neither is he. It's very sad and upsetting that when Dad goes now to watch a game at West Ham, that he's treated badly because of me. Instead of seeing the legend who devoted his life to the cause, there are some who prefer to tar him with the same brush of who he has for a son. "Tell your son he's a fucking Judas cunt," was one message he was asked to pass on to me. Dad did well not to react, though the guy did well to move away quickly, or he might have been in trouble. But it shouldn't be like that. What kind of way is that to treat him? What kind of fan would be so disrespectful? I hate that. They can call me whatever they like, but should leave Dad out of it. Whatever gripe they have with me doesn't justify the treatment he receives. Dad stuck around all of his career, won the FA Cup twice, and gave the West Ham fans some of their greatest memories. The least they can do is show him some loyalty in return. But I don't expect anything of the kind, just as they should not expect anything from me. I've tried not to think too much about what happened on the 15th of March 1997, but in light of everything that's gone on since, it's hard not to. We were away at Aston Villa, and I'd started a match which was scrappy and very competitive. After about half an hour, I went to challenge for a ball and caught my studs in the turf. Pain shot through my leg, and I knew straight away that it was broken. The physio ran onto the pitch, saw the agony in my face and the state of my leg. He called for the doctor and stretcher bearers. My memory of the following minutes is clouded by the searing pain and my body's reaction to it. I can, however, recall some cheering and applause as I was carried off around the visitors' end at Villa Park before being taken to hospital for treatment. I spent the next 4 months in plaster and rehab, but was fortunate that I could regain fitness during the summer and was back and ready for the start of the following season. During that time, I focused on recovering and put everything else to the back of my mind. It was only when I was relaxing with a few mates that I discovered what had actually happened that day in Birmingham. A couple of the lads I was out with were at the Villa match a few months before. We had a couple of beers and started to chat about the injury and the game. It was a 0-0 draw. They'd been afraid to bring the subject up with me before, but admitted that a section of the West Ham support had cheered the fact that I was being taken off, even though I was on a stretcher and in severe pain. My mates apologised, embarrassed that they had even shared a stand with people who could be so vindictive and nasty. I could barely believe what I was hearing. I knew all about the element in the crowd that didn't like me, but I never thought they would be pleased that I was badly injured. It made me feel sick to the stomach. I was only 18. What kind of coward treats an 18-year-old like that? They were grown men, but men whom I have looked in the eye and seen only hatred. I tried not to let on how much it had affected me. I kept the conversation going. Most of my mates, closest and otherwise, were all regulars at West Ham, so I asked them about their impression of the fans when it came to me. Be honest, I said. I want to know. It turned out that each one of them had at least one guy who sat beside them or near them who spent every home match dishing out stick to me for the whole game. Some had more than one, and others most of a section. I wasn't surprised. Mum and Aunt Sandra used to sit in the director's box, and even they had one geezer who sat a few rows behind them who would launch into tirades of abuse. Mum and Sandra are easy to recognise, so he knew what he was doing. Mum would occasionally stand up and glare at him to try and make him feel uncomfortable, but still he ranted. Mum never stopped going to games, even though she was sick of the abuse I was getting, and I went looking for that bloke a couple of times after matches, but he was always long gone. I haven't forgotten, though, nor has Dad. He doesn't usually show any emotion when I score goals. He's learned over the years to remain passive, especially as he'll often sit among fans of the opposing team at Chelsea away games and such. Mum told me that the only time she ever saw him celebrate a goal was when I half-volleyed one in at Upton Park in January 2006. They were back in the director's box, and Dad jumped to his feet with fists clenched and slowly turned around to make sure that everyone whom he wanted to be seen by had had a good view. I suppose he was looking for that same bloke who used to get at Mum and Sandra, but it didn't matter if he was there. Dad was making a bigger statement about his allegiance. Family first. Of course, I'd received the now customary welcome that day, jeered, booed and abused from the moment the Chelsea coach pulled up outside the Berlin ground. Fat Frank, Judas cunt, waste of money, and so on. I find it amusing that West Ham fans attempt to justify their hatred of me on the basis that I left the club for Chelsea. So many times I've heard them plead that they only boo me because I'm a traitor. I laugh when I see it written that I am an ex-West Ham favourite who the fans have now turned against. Bollocks. I was never a favourite. They booed me almost every week when I was there, for years. Now they're creating a myth that the way I'm treated is a direct result of my own actions. Had it been that simple, then I would have an understanding of their feelings. In fact, my moving was a direct result of their actions. They can, and they do deny it, but I know what happened, and so do others. I was having dinner with Ian Wright after he had compared the World Player of the Year award in Geneva in 2005. We reminisced about West Ham days, and he brought up the subject of the stick I would get from the fans when we played together there. It's strange. Sometimes I look back with a sense of disbelief that it had really been as bad as I seem to remember. And then someone like Wrighty recounts his memories, and I realise just how grim it was. I've become a stronger person for it. I know that I deal with disappointment better and that I have a determination to succeed, which is even more driven because of what I experienced in the past. Others have seen that in me. Rio has spoken privately and publicly of what I had to endure and how it made me a better player and a stronger person. I think I earned the respect of people who worked closely with me at that time for the way I conducted myself. They didn't think I would make it, and I did. Even now, I'm at a bit of a loss to trace the root of all this, why it started, why it got worse, and how it has reached the rampaging level it runs to now. I came into a team that was struggling to stay in the Premier League. We were fighting for survival, and no struggle looks pretty. I was up for the challenge, but I was not physically or mentally mature enough to cope with that pressure. It was different for Rio. He had a natural elegance to his game, which had already seen him dubbed the new Bobby Moore. Rio worked just as hard as me at his football, but I think he was more easily accepted by the fans because his talent was more obvious. I had ability, but I knew there wasn't much about me that would smack people in the face and make them shout, "Now that's talent." People said I was too slow to be a player. I'm quicker now at 28 than I was at 18, and that's through working on my sprinting and fitness. But it's a lie to say I lacked pace. I'm no sprinter, and I have an unusual gait, which means I'll never look like Thierry Henry on the run. I have a different way. Zinedine Zidane has his own way. He's not fast, but his speed is deceptive because he's busy with the ball and always looking up for an option rather than bearing down on goal. I'm not comparing myself to Zidane. I wish I could. In my opinion, he's one of the greatest players to grace the game. But I know that I'm quicker than people give me credit for. I was certainly faster than some of our lads at the time, but pace isn't everything. And neither, it seemed, was playing good football. There was a bit of confusion about how West Ham actually played and how people claim they played at that time. It's a fallacy to assert that we were a good football unit because that's not the team I remember most of the time. We were direct and high tempo. We had to be. When you're in a relegation battle, there's no time for fancy football and free-flowing moves. I tried to get the ball down and play, but I wasn't over-elaborate. At the same time, I was more concerned with constructing moves than maybe some of our more senior players. And when things don't go your way, that can become a target for the supporters. There was an environment of contrasting appreciation at Upton Park at the time. At one end of the spectrum, they would cheer a thumping tackle and make heroes of their hard men. At the other, a little trick or flick which beat a man but didn't necessarily gain advantage was greeted with great reverence. I didn't do much of either, if any at all. Mine was a very simple way of playing football. Simplicity being genius, as Ron Greenwood always told Dad. Unfortunately, the purity of that style escaped certain people who were only interested in the very basic pleasures which football can offer up. I'm not saying that I was a paragon of everything great and good in football. What I was doing was trying my best to do what I thought was correct, and booing me for that was out of order. Even after I scored 10 goals in my first full season, I was still getting it in the neck. Instead of giving me a chance to do even better, I got criticised for not being good enough. And no matter how much crap I've had to take from West Ham fans, they always make up a new and ingenious angle to try and put me down more. After winning the Premiership twice and playing at the highest level for England, West Ham fans will still have you believe that I only got this far because I had an easy run into the team because my dad was the assistant manager. I can only imagine that these are people who are uneducated about football. If you have any idea about how to treat a young player who's trying to do his best, then you'd realise that the only way to screw him up more is to boo him. The only way to help him improve is to allow him time and be constructive. I never got any constructive criticism from West Ham fans. They wanted the opposite, to destroy me. They were willing me to fail, and they still do. As a result of my selection in the team, maybe the fans who saw older and more proven players slip out of the lineup started to ask themselves why I was in it. They had a ready-made and convenient answer sitting on the bench: Dad and Uncle Harry. It wasn't just me who was getting it at that time. We lost a couple of games to teams below us in the table, and the team was barracked, and Harry would have season tickets thrown at him, along with a request to fuck off. Generally speaking, he would return the compliment and the season book with a swift flick of the right arm. There was a belief among the supporters that I'd been given a shirt without having to work for it or prove myself. Had I been brought in having made my name at another club as a promising young player, maybe it would have been easier. Had my name not been Lampard, it certainly would have been. People insist in all other walks of life that you can only play with the cards that you've been dealt. I'm no different. I was the victim of circumstance in a lot of ways, and I couldn't help who my dad was, and I wouldn't change that, or the fact that I was pushing to break through into the team at the age of 17. I have no regrets because it made me strong. strong enough to deal with anything. By the time I reached 21, I realised that I was fighting a losing battle. I would never cast off the daddy's boy tag at West Ham, and I started to see myself at other clubs and playing in different colours. At first I was a bit shocked. All of my life I'd dreamt of pulling on the West Ham shirt, and if you'd offered me any club in the world, I would have turned them down for my club, West Ham United. And then, after years of constant and debilitating abuse, it turned. I would have done anything to get out. I would have dropped a division or gone abroad. I would have gone anywhere. Now I'm at Chelsea, I feel fulfilled in every possible way with my career, and I find it laughable that I'm still such a target for abuse. After my relationship with Ellen and our daughter Luna, the thing that gives me most satisfaction in life is having left Upton Park and gone on to achieve what I have. The fans who booed me and called me for everything can take credit for helping to drive me on to achieve greater things. To a certain extent, they still do. My family and I know that even if I won the World Cup single-handedly for England, there would still be West Ham fans who would say that I missed an easy chance or misplaced a pass. We have a good laugh about it because that's what it is. Laughable. Laughable that people could hold a grudge for no good reason. If the best revenge is to live well, then I'm glad to say that life is very sweet for me. Very sweet indeed. Better than it ever was at West Ham, even though they were the club I had always wanted to play for. Now, I know I'll never play for West Ham again.